Okay, so let's unpack this. Today, we're doing a deep dive, and it's sparked by some really interesting observations from a channel, one that focuses on life in Los Angeles. Perchance to read, and we've got this material looking at LA culture, and, a big idea that keeps coming up is this sense that people can be a bit disconnected.
Yeah, like there isn't always that automatic taking each other in, as the source puts it.
Exactly. But it's important to say the material does point out exceptions.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like during those big fires, you see communities pulling together in amazing ways. That absolutely happens.
For sure. But what we're digging into today is more the everyday baseline, the sort of general cultural vibe outside of those major crisis moments.
Right, the long-standing norms.
So yeah, our goal here is to explore why that might be the case, at least according to this perspective, and what it could mean for someone, say, thinking of moving to LA, maybe even retiring there.
And how it might connect maybe indirectly to some bigger issues the material touches on, like homelessness, seen from that kind of high-altitude view it presents.
It's about understanding the landscape, the sort of unspoken social rules you might bump into.
Makes sense.
Okay, so where do we start? The source material looks at a few different contributing factors, kind of paints a broad picture. What pressures does it highlight?
Well, it seems like a few things kind of intersect. The material definitely talks about homelessness, acknowledges it's super complex, obviously, with many causes. But it flags some things relevant to this discussion, like the economic pressure is huge, rents are just sky high.
Yeah.
Which makes stable housing really fragile for a lot of people, especially maybe younger folks. The source mentions, losing a roommate could literally mean losing your home.
Wow. And surprisingly, the weather comes into play, too.
It does, yeah, kind of ironically. That beautiful year-round mild climate.
The big draw for so many people.
Exactly. But it also makes it, more possible for someone to survive without shelter compared to somewhere with, brutal winters or scorching summers.
Yeah.
It lowers one practical barrier.
I remember that detail in the source about eating Christmas dinner outside when it's 80 degrees. That really hits home, doesn't it? That constant mildness.
It really does stick with you. And the material also mentions external factors pushing people towards LA.
Like what?
Well, it makes this pretty stark point that some other cities have apparently given people experiencing homelessness one-way bus tickets to places like LA.
Seriously? Just send them there.
Yeah, sometimes with very little, actual support lined up on the other end, which is obviously an incredibly difficult way to arrive somewhere.
Absolutely. A really tough starting point.
Yeah.
The source also flags other things, right? Personal crises that can just knock someone off their feet.
Definitely. Things like domestic violence situations, struggles with addiction, or even young people maybe escaping bad situations back home and ending up totally isolated in LA.
Nowhere to turn.
Exactly. And then there are the dreamers. LA pulls in so many people with huge aspirations,
The Hollywood dream or tech or business.
Right. And when those big dreams maybe don't quite pan out and there's no family nearby, no easy way back, well, surviving in such an expensive city gets really, really hard.
Okay, so those are some heavy external pressures. The source points to economic, climate, personal stuff.
Yeah.
But it also talks about something more internal, like within the culture itself.
Yeah, exactly. This idea that there's maybe an embedded sort of disconnectedness in LA culture.
How so?
Well, the thinking presented is that because the city is just so huge and there's so much going on, jobs, traffic, endless things to do, there's this kind of widespread assumption.
An assumption about what?
That everyone else is just incredibly busy, like constantly running around, totally preoccupied with their own thing.
The assumption of busyness. I can see that.
Right. And according to the source, this assumption kind of feeds itself. It creates a cycle.
Okay.
So if I assume you're way too busy to help me out with something, maybe I just won't ask.
Makes sense. You don't want to impose.
Exactly. And flip side, if I assume you're super busy and you've got everything under control, I'm probably less likely to proactively offer help, right? Because I figure, they're fine, they don't need it, or they wouldn't have time anyway.
We just assume the other person is okay managing on their own.
Yeah.
So we don't reach out as much.
That's the idea presented. And this is where the source contrasts LA with, I think it used an example of the Midwest.
Yeah, where if there's a crisis, like carpools and meal trains and stuff just seem to materialize.
Yeah.
Almost automatically.
Right. That comparison is used to highlight the difference the source is getting at. Generally, from this perspective, LA isn't seen as having that kind of default, visible, mutual reliance baked into the everyday culture.
It's not that people don't care.
No, not at all. But because people might be struggling quietly, partly because of this assumption that everyone's busy and okay, it can be hard for others to even realize there's a need.
And that connects back to what the source says about LA being a city of transplants, right? So many people don't have those deep local roots.
Exactly. No family down the street, maybe not those lifelong friendships that form an automatic safety net if things go sideways. And even if someone could help, the source suggests there might still be that hesitation, not wanting to intrude on what you assume is someone else's very busy, very focused life.
It sounds like this complex loop of everyone assuming things about everyone else.
Yeah, the source actually uses this great analogy from Gone with the Wind.
Oh, really?
Yeah, comparing it to how Scarlett and Rhett kind of kept missing each other, being standoffish because of the vibes they were picking up, and it just spiraled.
Huh. Okay, I can picture that. Misunderstandings breeding more misunderstanding.
Exactly. There's that quote, I think it's Rhett saying something like, "It seems we've been at cross purposes, doesn't it?"
Right.
And that's the parallel being drawn.
Seems we've been at cross purposes, doesn't it?
People in LA assume others are distant and self-sufficient, and those others sense that distance and assume the first person is busy and doing fine. So nobody explicitly asks for help, nobody feels like they should pry, and the disconnect just kind of stays there.
Wow. Okay, so what does all this mean then? If you're listening and maybe thinking about moving to LA, perhaps later in life for retirement, coming from somewhere maybe different.
Well, this raises a really important question, doesn't it? If you're used to a place where neighbors checking in on each other is more of the cultural default.
Yeah, where there's that built-in safety net feeling.
You might find LA requires a pretty big adjustment, especially maybe if you don't have a job or some other built-in structure like a club or church that automatically puts you in regular contact with people who'd notice if you weren't around or seemed off.
And again, it's not saying Angelenos aren't kind people. The source is clear. They volunteer. They donate.
Right. It's not about individual kindness. It's about that automatic cultural assumption of looking out for each other in the day-to-day flow of life. That's what the source suggests might be less prevalent.
So if you arrive without many existing ties,
you might not find those connections forming automatically. Your neighbor could be new too, or just passing through, or working 3 jobs, or just constantly out and about navigating that huge city.
So they might not be the person who notices if your routine changes or if you haven't picked up your mail, partly because they just assume you're off doing one of the million things people do in LA.
And that's really the core takeaway, I think, for anyone considering a move, especially retirement. You might just observe less reliant on each other as the standard community culture.
And if that sounds potentially isolating,
then LA could be a tough environment unless you go in eyes wide open, prepared for that.
loneliness becomes a real potential issue. The author even notes a similar dynamic can happen in cities with big language barriers. Which leads right into the final point, the sort of call to action from the source material. Given this cultural environment it describes, what's the advice?
It's pretty direct, actually. The material basically says you have to be intentional. You have to be incredibly proactive about building your own safe community.
It won't just happen by itself.
Probably not, or at least you can't count on it happening just because you live in the same street or in the same building, maybe the way it might feel in other places.
You have to treat building community like a job almost.
Yeah, like a deliberate project. You have to seek it out, consciously make connections, and then, crucially, put in the effort to maintain them consistently.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, then.
It really just highlights how vital it is to be intentional about your support system, you know? Maybe especially in places where connection isn't the automatic cultural setting. It kind of asks you, the listener, to think, how do I actively build the relationships I need?
That's a really powerful question to end on. It makes you reflect on your own community, wherever you are. How do those bonds work? Is it automatic, or does it take real conscious effort from people?
And maybe, how can you be more intentional about cultivating that safe community for yourself? Definitely something worth mulling over.
Absolutely. And this whole deep dive, all these ideas, they really stemmed from the observations shared by that channel we mentioned earlier, the one focused on LA life.
That's right. And if you want to check out more of their stuff, the channel is Perchance to Read, and you can find them on Spoutable. Their handle is just Perchance to Read.
Yeah, definitely check them out and subscribe to the Perchance to Read YouTube channel too, if you want to explore more of their takes on the city and its unique culture.
Worth a look. Until next time.